Well, good day everyone, I'm Tom Kenyon. I'm the CEO, the National CEO of the Sporting Shooters Association. Welcome to this chat. Our guest today is Paul Fitzgerald, who's the President of Western Australia, also our Senior Vice President. We're going to have a good chat with him today. We're going to talk about a lot of things, but make sure you sign up to be a member of the SSAA if you're not. The link for doing that is in the description below. And also, if you've got a question or a comment that you want to make, just do that in the comment section down below, and we'll try and get to your question in future videos. I did an interview with Juddy, our national president, a little while ago, and we talked about his role and how he got into the role and his background in sport in shooting. So perhaps you might start there. How did you get into the SSAA?
I've had my firearm licence for 39 years. It had never occurred to me that I would join a club and get involved in some structured shooting. Most of my shooting was done out in the bush. Spent a fair amount of my life out in the bush. So when I moved to a capital city in Western Australia, the SSAA club environment was presented to me at a shot expo.
Yeah.
So that was about 10 or 12 years ago. I went to a shot expo in Perth when we had the shot expos over there. And then I joined a handgun club because I hadn't shot handguns before, so that was a big appeal for me.
Yeah. So mainly hunting, rifles, that sort of stuff?
100%, yeah. So I'd been out in the bush, and firearms were sort of a tool that we had anyway, and obviously we would go on some organised hunting trips and things like that. So chance to get away like most people that have a firearm. Once I joined the SSAA club, very quickly my personality type was, okay, I like to be in control of my own destiny. So
Yes.
After not a great amount of time, I became the president of the handgun club.
Yeah.
And I've been the president of that handgun club for about the last 7 years.
Yeah, that's in Perth?
That's in Perth, yeah, that's in Wanneroo at the Wanneroo Shooting Complex.
Yeah.
And then got involved in the discipline a bit more, and then of course went to an AGM of the SSAA in Western Australia through the club structure.
Yep.
Obviously the state body's comprised of club delegates and things like that. So then found myself very quickly on the SSAA state executive for the state. And then a few years later, I was successfully elected as the president of Western Australia. So that then led to an interrogation of what happens at a national level, because it's a fantastic organisation. And again, my personality type is, if I'm going to do something, then I'm going to go boots and all. It's not half an attempt.
Yeah.
So then I found myself on the national board as a representative for Western Australia, and a year or so ago I got elected as the National Senior Vice President. So for those members that are out there that wonder, who are these people and how do they get there? Essentially, it's a ground-up organisation. We're a member-based organisation, and any member of the SSAA can find any position at club, state or national level that they want to attain or they want to contribute to. So there is no hard and fast rule about what skill set you need to bring to the organisation. I think if you're full of energy, lots of people have a different skill set. You don't have to be the world's best shooter. I'm definitely not.
Yeah.
But if you can contribute, you've got energy, and your underlying desire is to help the organisation for the best interest of the members, then you'll do well.
And that goes at all roles. I think, the range officers we have, all volleys, the people, the secretaries of clubs, all of those sorts of things are super critical. It's like all sports, nothing works without volunteers, and so grateful for the work that they do at the club level and everything else. So thank you for the work that you do.
No problem.
Which is a lot. I remember calling you all hours of the day and night, and you're always there, so that's good. But the big issue, of course, for everyone is everyone's really interested in the West Australian firearms laws, what's happening. We talked a few months ago now, and we got a sort of update on where they were at, and I think that might have been late last year. So there's been quite a bit that's happened. We've had the Western Australian election in the meantime. We had some quite dramatic developments in the Parliament with terms of a review and everything. So let's start at the election. What was the wash up from the election? What happened there? We put quite a bit of effort into influencing that election, or at least having our voice heard in that election. So how do you think that went?
Yeah, we did talk about that. We talked about the SSAA's involvement with particularly the National Party in the lead up to the election in March last year. We had a fantastic result. For people that don't understand that political process, before the election in Western Australia, there were 3 members of the National Party that were in the lower house. The National Party and the leader in Western Australia, Shane Love, will tell anybody that wants to listen that through a direct result of the SSAA and a sporting shooters campaign in Western Australia, resulted in 6 members of the National Party attaining seats in the lower house. And politically, that turns into vote flow, so it sort of changed the environment in the upper house, in the Legislative Council. And in a sort of a quick snapshot of where that's ended up after the election, obviously Labor maintained power because government's formed in the in the lower house, and people saw that from the outset that it was a bit of a loss. But Labor took a serious haircut.
Yeah.
And one of the things that people have forgotten is that the police minister at the time, Paul Papalia, was then removed from that portfolio. And we have a new police minister now in Reece Whitby. And that doesn't happen because the police minister decides he doesn't want to be the police minister anymore. That happens through the power of the people in the parliament.
Yep.
And the Labor Party clearly made that decision. So post that, the upper house came back to the parliament in May, and then a motion was put forward to send the West Australian Firearms Act to the Standing Committee on Legislation.
Yep.
So that has now been enlivened, and that submissions to that finish on the 4th of July, and then the Legislative Council will have 3 months to report back to the Parliament. And for the shooters out there that watch this, and SSAA members, what that means is that essentially we climbed Mount Everest.
Yeah.
We've got 2 million voters in Western Australia. We've got 88,000 licensed firearms owners. We've got 16,000 SSAA members. We formed the Community Alliance. The SSAA were the principal founding partner in the West Australian Community Alliance. And I can tell members out there that when I've been in meetings, that the general consensus is that we had a huge influence on the election.
Yeah.
And we're now given another opportunity for the Parliament of Western Australia in the political environment to interrogate the Firearms Act. And there's lots of misinformation coming out of Western Australia across the socials, and various other commentators have been talking about the rhetoric of the police minister saying that other states and territories might like to adopt this perfect legislation.
I don't think they want that.
I don't think they do. So,
No.
and members out there are listening to how this new digital portal doesn't work, and people can't get hunting authorities and things like that. So it is by no means a success, what's been done. I've written a number of articles, a dozen or so, in the rural press.
Yeah, we share them through on our emails as well, so members would have seen them.
100%. And again, just touching on that for a minute, there's a fair amount of commentary about, why this is not in the mainstream media and why we're not on the Channel 7 News or the only newspaper in Western Australia.
That's not up to us.
That's not our task.
Yeah.
The government of the day decided to park this argument in the rural environment. They talked about farmers and primary producers and pastoralists. So fundamentally, we showed up and we cocked our leg in their backyard and said, yep, no problems. We can go and talk to the people that engage with licensed firearms owners. Other than clubs and other locations in the urban areas, most people use their firearms out in the bush.
Yep.
So that's why the SSAA WA strategy was to go and get our message out into the rural press. It's been very, very successful. We've seen membership growth across the spectrum in the regional areas, people that have never even heard of the SSAA.
Yeah.
And given the age of the organisation, we're 75 years old now, we just have taken for granted, I think, across the spectrum that everybody knows who the SSAA is.
That's right. Yeah.
There's a whole new cohort of people that come through that have no idea who we are and what we do. So,
and just back on the media, they put on what they want to put on, right? So we can go, which we have gone to them with press releases and stories and everything. But if they just ignore it, which they have been doing too, then there's not much we can do about that, right? So we're sort of stuck with we'll put our story out, we'll pitch our story to journalists and everything else, but if they don't want to report it or the editors don't want them to report it, well, we're pretty much stuck. But the good thing is we've been able to get into the rural papers and all of those things. We've had an impact there, as you were saying, so that's good.
So back on to the outcomes of what's happened. So I think in the halls of power in Western Australia and in those sporting and political circles, the impact that we had and the outcomes from the Standing Committee on Legislation are expected to be quite high.
Yeah.
There's lots of evidence that it doesn't work. Some of the stuff in the Act, the head of power stuff, is not likely to change unless the Act is reopened.
Yeah.
There's a lot of political explanations.
Which is the hardest thing to do. To get a government to reopen an Act they only just passed is they have to admit that they made big mistakes.
That's going to be a heavy lift.
Yeah.
So I explain it quite often to people when they don't. They're not politically minded, and I explain to them that the Firearms Act is a bit like the Road Traffic Act.
Yeah.
So that talks about how we drive on the left-hand side of the road, and the firearms regulations are like the road traffic regulations.
Yeah.
And that talks about how fast we drive in school zones and how fast we drive down the freeway. So
and they're a lot easier to change.
They are. They can be changed without an interrogation by the Parliament. So the minister, we've met with the new minister, Reece Whitby, a number of times now.
How are you finding him?
He's much more conciliatory than the previous police minister, so that's good.
Have you met with him more often than you met with the previous police minister?
Not at this point. I mean, he's only been in the job for about 3 minutes,
Yeah, right,
and he's trying to be Eddie everywhere and
Yeah.
go and meet all the police officers and engage with his portfolio. But
He did open a range for you, didn't he?
he did open a new gun. He reopened a gun range for
Yeah.
SSAA at the Southern Districts Rifle Club, which was fantastic.
Yeah. I don't think you would have got Papalia doing
You
that.
wouldn't have got the previous police minister to come anywhere near it. It was like kryptonite for him, but
Yeah.
he's not Superman by any means.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had a much better engagement with the minister, and then that flows down into the department, which is WA Police.
Yeah.
So a new working group's been established, and that working group comprises a dozen or so respected, long-standing organisations. So all the major shooting organisations, farming organisations, and we're now back at the table with WA Police. And on the surface of things, their disposition seems to be that they understand that some mistakes have been made, and they'd like to work with the organisations like the SSAA to try and get this fixed. And we're in a transition year, so we have 12 months where 88,000 firearm owners need to get into a digital system, which is a huge change in 50 years for Western Australia.
Well, and especially seeing as it's not working as advertised. I mean, that.
And I think that was politically pressured. I'm not here to defend the regulator or WA Police, but I think they were under a fair amount of pressure from the government at the time to get this done because the election was looming, and then we had the federal election immediately afterwards. They're very much looking to work with us and see which things are not working in reality and practicality. But the message for West Australians that are seeking to get their licence transitioned in the next 12 months is the message we've been given is that WA Police want to work with licence owners to get them through this portal. And if people split the numbers, I've recently alluded to this, every 3 months we've got 22,000 sheep that need to get into the shearing shed and they need to get out the other end.
Yeah.
As at the 1st of July, we've got about 12,000 souls in Western Australia on the portal.
Yeah.
And we've got about 8,500 properties that have been registered for people to use a firearm. So they're not great numbers given what we've got to do every quarter, but it's only the first 3 months.
Yeah.
And there's lots of problems. WA Police admit that. They're trying to fix that every day. So again, I'm not here for SSAA members to think that I'm defending the actions of WA Police or the licensing regulator, but the reality is that we need to deal what's in front of us, and firearm owners just need to ante up. There's been cries for 20 plus years for people to get a digital licence in Western Australia, and here we are. It's not the perfect system, but if you want to keep shooting, you want to keep going to your club, you want to keep going out hunting,
deal with what you got.
Get onto the digital portal, get yourself through the other side. There seems to be a fair amount of flexibility with WA Police about how long you've got. Yes, there's this 90-day business, but if you engage with WA Police, you sort of get the green light to get potentially an extension. So we're quite happy about how they're approaching that. We're trying to get that message out to SSAA members and the wider West Australian firearm community. This is the time to be positive and grip it up, and there'll be issues, but firearm owners are usually very forthright people because it takes a fair amount of effort to get a firearm. So don't capitulate, stay on point and get your gun licence.
Right. The review that's going now in the upper house, I mean, well, the first thing that really struck me about that was the Greens voted for it. So it's so obvious to everybody in Parliament that there's things wrong with this bill that even the Greens voted for a review into it. So that was a big thing. And in the end, Labor, I think, when they saw it was inevitable, I think they voted for it. So they've got the review going. By the time people see this, submissions will have closed, but we've emailed out to our members in Western Australia explaining why they need to make a submission, how they can make a submission, how to write a submission. And it's actually not hard for future reference for people. It's actually not that hard to write up a submission. It doesn't need to be complex or anything else like that. It just needs to be polite, courteous, and just put out your main points of why you think something should or shouldn't happen. So if anyone ever asks you to make a submission to a committee of Parliament or anything like that, don't overthink it. Just write down your thoughts in a neat, concise way, politely, and that's effective in its own right. You've got the review coming up. Probably by the time people are seeing this, it's getting close to hearings, so the committee will be hearing hearings, and I assume you'll be presenting at that.
100%. So I wrote to all 37 members individually of the Legislative Council in Western Australia on behalf of the SSAA. I got a response from the chair immediately. We've put our submission in that also says we're more than happy to bear witness at a hearing, if there's a public hearing, and extrapolate on our views about the things that can need repair. One of the other key points that I want people to take away that are listening to us today, Tom, is lobbying and advocacy is a long game.
Yeah.
And what we've seen in the last couple of years, particularly out of Western Australia and other states and territories that have wanted to sort of chip into what's happening in Western Australia from afar, they're nowhere to be seen right now.
Yeah.
And we're at the other end of this fight in terms of the political fight.
Yeah.
But our advocacy continues with SSAA.
Yeah.
And it goes on for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And you can't show up and take a video of yourself and convince everybody on social media that you're going to save the world.
Yeah.
And then vaporise when it doesn't go your way, and then everybody's sort of left hanging about, well, where's all these great advocates for firearm owners in Western Australia? Oh, well, we lost that fight and so we've left.
Yeah.
But that's not what the SSAA is about.
Yeah.
We're here for the long haul, and one of the terms that's been bandied around again the halls of Parliament is these guys at the SSAA are pretty relentless.
Yeah.
They're not going to win every round of every battle,
No.
but we're going to stay, and we're going to stay the whole way through.
Yeah.
We're not going anywhere. People join the organisation, and that's all we ask from them.
Yeah.
And then we ask from them to stay in the advocacy fight.
Yeah.
We don't need constant donations from you. We don't need to constantly have a hand in your pocket.
And that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, I think from time to time, we're going to ask our members to do something. We're going to ask them to write a letter to their local member. We're going to ask them to write to a minister. And again, it doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be a long, drawn-out letter with, flourishes of English and all of that sort of stuff. Just your simple thoughts, politely expressed in a logical way. And it's very valuable for people to write in and write their own letter. Just as an aside for our viewers, when I was in Parliament, we had a sort of a rule of thumb that if someone wrote a letter to an MP, not a form letter that you just sort of signed off and someone else faxed in for you, but a proper letter that you wrote, emailed, handwritten, anything like that. We just, for every one person that did that, there were 20 other people that agreed with them. So for every person who writes a letter, it's tremendously influential. If you get 50, 20, 30, 100 people writing in, then it all gets multiplied out and they think, oh, this is a serious issue in my electorate or whatever it is. So from time to time, you and the Western Australian executive are going to ask people to get involved in this fight. And that means writing a letter or doing whatever they need to do. And it's incredibly important that they do that.
And what we've seen, Tom, is before all of this kicked off back in March 2022, you could count on one hand a political party or a political representative in Western Australia that cared about guns.
Yeah.
And people can take 2 seconds on social media and various other media platforms to see how many Western Australian politicians from various parties across the divide are now interested to discuss the firearm debate.
Yeah, right.
And this hasn't gone away. The firearm debate hasn't gone away. In an ordinary political cycle, there'd be the big hot topic, and there'd be 2 or 3, as you know, that would come to the election.
Yeah.
And then once the election's over and the sides have been
everyone
drawn,
packs up and goes
everyone
home.
packs up and leaves. The circus leaves, right? Here we are now, where 3 or 4 months to the other side of the West Australian state election, the number one topic that the Parliament is interrogating and thinking about is firearms.
Yeah, and the government definitely didn't want that. I can tell you from experience, they did not want that to happen.
They did not want that. So we have done a magnificent job, along with our counterparts in the Community Alliance, which is the West Australian Rifle Association, West Australian Pistol Association, Australian Clay Target Association, WA Grains Council and the WA Firearm Traders Association, just to name a few.
Yeah.
They have all contributed a huge lift to get this over the line.
Yeah.
And our tentacles spread far and wide across the great state of Western Australia. And this is the result.
Yeah.
There's lots of politicians out there that think nothing of having a forum in the bush to go and talk to people about guns.
Yeah.
Now, 3 years ago, that wouldn't have been a thing.
Even before March, before the election, the Libs were running away.
Yep.
No one wanted, as you said, no one wanted to talk about it. And to be honest, when I thought about it, I didn't expect to be in this position. I didn't think that we'd be re-examining the Act. I thought we just had to fight them on the most egregious parts of it. And so here they are, re-examining the Act. There's a possibility. I mean, it is hard to get them to reopen the Act, but there's a possibility they will. We can't write that down yet. There's a good chance we'll get changes to the regulations. We're definitely going to get changes to the portal because it's not working, so they are going to improve that. So, you've been tremendously successful, I think.
And like I said earlier on today, the rhetoric that's coming out is a bit of a counter, and that's how the politics works.
Yeah.
We get a bit of an upper hand, the government comes out, the minister comes out. That's just the rhetoric of politics, right? That's how it works.
Yeah.
So there isn't anything new about all the regulators across Australia getting together 2 or 3 times a year and talking about firearm laws. It's been going on for an eternity, right?
Yeah.
Ordinarily it happens in the background and nobody knows about it. But there's an eternal change in acts and regulations around Australia, because firearm regulation needs to be fluid.
Yeah.
Things change as much as the industry changes and new guns come onto the market, et cetera, et cetera. So the regulators always catch up with each other. What we are suffering in Western Australia is 50 years worth of neglect, and the tidal wave has come in one big hit. So I wake up most days and talk to my counterparts about how we have 16 spinning chainsaws in the sky at any given point, because we're not just dealing with one issue. We've got hunting authority issues, we've got portal issues, we've got all of the clubs across the divide. We've got over
properties, you've got
200 clubs in Western Australia that are all being interrogated by the regulator as well, because they've been lacking in their ability to manage that space for a long time. So we've got a full reset pretty much. But the key point there that I want to make is that other states and territories and SSAA organisations and members in particular, yes, there is no doubt that the rhetoric of politics will talk about the toughest gun laws in Australia come out of WA, et cetera, et cetera. Every state and territory will have good and parts of its regulations. For an eternity, all the other states and territories have had a minimum age. We never had a minimum age in Western Australia. We've now come into a national consistency that we have a minimum age. It's not ideal, but it's a change we're going to need to accept. There is some good stuff that comes out of national consistency for firearm regulation, and then there's some bad stuff. We've just got to try and find that developing middle ground that the community expects from the firearm community. In Australia, we talk about 20 years ago. Well, 20 years ago, for those that are watching, was 2005. Okay, it wasn't 1985. That's 40 years ago. So the time catches up and people lose sight of what has actually happened. We're in a very strong position. We still get people joining firearm organisations and taking up the sport of shooting. And a lot of the time people ask me what they can do. What do I do? I'm just one person, you know, I'm a small cog in the machine. The thing that they can do is find somebody in their network and introduce them to shooting.
Exactly right.
That's what they can do. And they can make sure that they're legal, they can get a young person and they can introduce them to shooting, the reality of having
and the other thing,
just
be open about your sport, right? Just say, I'm a shooter. What did you do on the weekend? I went down to the range. I do rifle shooting, you know, and I do target shooting.
It's not a dirty word anymore, particularly in WA. It's not a dirty word to have a firearm. As much as the government tried to make it a dirty word,
backfired on them.
There are a lot of people that are sitting in doctor surgeries and at airports and at work saying, yeah, I'm a firearm owner and I've had it for 5 years or I've had it for 45 years and I'm unhappy about how we've been affected. So that is something that the government missed. And if the other states and territory governments are sitting one day watching our interview today, they should take heed of that warning that firearm owners are not the bad guys that they make us out to be. We're just regular people that vote them in and out of office, and they should never again make the mistake that the WA Labor government
The other thing, we're actually not asking for a lot out of government. It's really just leave us alone and let us compete in our sport, or enjoy our sport. That's all we're asking for. We're not coming to them looking for wads of cash or anything else like that. It's just let us enjoy our sport.
And we won't sit idly by as a collective national organisation that's internationally affiliated and let politicians who breeze through the parliament and breeze out the other end, present company excluded, you were there for some time, but we won't sit idly by and let these elected officials come into the parliaments across Australia, kick us and then vaporise with their pension. We're not going to do that because we're here for the long haul. So that's the strength in the SSAA. And if people really want to talk about how strong the SSAA is that is driven home when everybody complains about the SSAA.
What did you do? What did blah, blah,
So if you want to complain about the 800-pound gorilla, then we're it. And we'll happily take that complaint, all right? But before you complain, make sure you're a member.
And make sure you've contributed. So I think there'll be a lot of people from around the country who are looking in at Western Australia and wondering whether that's going to come to my state. And I think one of the benefits of what you've done is shown that, well, that's not going to happen easily. And if they really want to fight that drags on and on and on, well, okay, do that. But we're not going to back down and we're going to keep going and everything else. But what lessons do you think that other states should take away from this and the process of it?
So I think SSAA members around Australia need to understand that for all the times that the police and the politicians get together, SSAA is a national body that's consolidated across all 8 states and territories. We regularly meet and talk and engage and try to get on the front foot. We can't let the politicians and the police intimidate SSAA members and gun owners around Australia, because the organisation is also on the front foot, trying to stay ahead of any new developments that are happening and trying to be engaged. Because if we're not in the conversation, then they don't come to us. And our members and non-firearm owners, they know that if they want a question, and journalists, they come to the source of all truth, which is the Sporting Shooters Association, because we're on the front foot. The message to other SSAA members around Australia is stay engaged, even though it's not on your doorstep. It's on our doorstep right now. Okay. It might leave for 5 minutes and land on yours and then come back to us. There's always a challenge. Every state and territory's always got a challenge. There's always legislative arguments. There's always bills being put about hunting. I know there's a couple at the moment that are kicking around.
One in New South Wales.
So it's not like this doesn't happen in other states and territories. So don't be concerned that it's all idling away just in Western Australia. We just got it all at once. That's the primary difference.
And probably other states won't get it as dramatically.
Correct.
So they'll get little bit by little bit, and changes of police policy, whatever else it is.
We just got it all at once because the planets lined up where we had a unimaginable majority by Labor who used firearm ownership as the political train to drive at the public and keep them frightened.
And that's an important lesson, actually, because there's, between now and next year, there's 3 elections. So there's South Australia, then there's Victoria, so they're both next year. And then straight after that, in March 27, there was New South Wales. And the big danger, and this is especially true in South Australia because the current Premier here is very popular, and the big danger is that Labor will get a majority in both the lower and the upper house, and you don't want that. You never want one party to have a majority in both houses. It's a very bad result, and I think that's what happened in Western Australia. They could just ram through whatever they wanted because they'd got that big majority. So, voters should be very wary of, to be very, very cautious about the situation whenever they're coming into an election, and start thinking about what happens here if one party gets a majority. And we saw it even, back in, I think we saw that back in 2004 when Howard got a majority in the lower house and the Senate, and he passed that work choices legislation, which ultimately caused him an incredible amount of grief. So in many ways, the worst thing that can happen is a majority. So the lesson here is don't vote for majorities in both houses for governments, and keep eternally vigilant. And in most cases, you're looking for the small stuff, not the big dramatic change that you guys have had.
And again, firearm owners also need to understand that they can't throw their guns under the bus on another issue. Okay, I know it's important. There's always other things like childcare and employment and things like that.
That's true.
But their sport and their ownership of a firearm is also important in their vote. And I know we've harped on about this for the last couple of years, and it's all about politics, right?
But
what is SSAA just turned into a political chat fest? The bottom line is they're the decision makers. So SSAA members who are firearm owners or not, they need to understand that that is a key part of what we do. We have to get into the conversation that happens at the top end of the terrace.
Our sport is entirely reliant on politics.
Correct.
It's a regulated sport. It's not like the US where they have that Second Amendment constitutional right. It's not a right. It's
legal
privileges granted by the Parliament. Just because we're not interested in politics doesn't mean politics isn't interested in us. And if we want our sport to survive, we need to be alert.
And again, if we're talking about other types of sports, and it was the BMX Association of Australia, the temperature wouldn't be there as much as it is because we have firearms. We like our security. We like our privacy. But we can still maintain our security and privacy as firearm owners in Western Australia. But we can get our voice out there, and everyone can hear our voice. They don't need to know where we live, and they don't need to know how many guns we have, and we need to stay away from the criminal elements who want to try and target us. But our voice is free. And we need to get that out there in the Australian community.
That's exactly right.
We need to get our voice underneath the feet of the politicians who wake up in the morning and hear it. And so they understand that we are not going to be kicked. And one of the catchphrases for the SSAA across Australia is relentless.
Well, and look, if they don't hear us, they'll just ignore us. It's that simple. So thanks so much, Paul. Thanks for coming in. It's been a good chat. Remember to like and subscribe, comments, questions, put them in the comment section down below. If you've got questions, we'll try and answer them in future videos. Links to membership in the links below.